All right, welcome to the TIE Fighter podcast. Today, I am blessed to have a retired General Teichert on with me. Go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit.
Michael, it is awesome to be here with you. We linked up at Edwards Air Force Base, a place called the Center of the Aerospace Testing Universe. But I served in the Air Force for 28 years as a fighter pilot, as a test pilot. I ended my career as a commander at Joint Base Andrews, then the commander at Edwards, then our nation's senior defense official to Iraq, and then leading international affairs for the Air Force and the Space Force. I retired about a year and a half ago to make more of an impact on our country than I believed that I could make in uniform. And I'm doing keynote speaking, I'm writing a lot, I'm doing national security interviews, I ran for US Senate, and I'm hanging out with cool people like Michael Meyer.
I appreciate that. So today we were going to talk about a little bit about some of the things you've started doing since you separated, and you kind of codified your Air Force journey in your recent book. Mind telling a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm going to hold it up just so that folks can see it. Boom is the title. The subtitle is Leadership That Breaks Barriers, Challenges Convention, and Ignites Innovation. And I wrote it because we had this incredible journey at Edwards that, Michael, you were a key part of, where when I showed up, it was this bureaucratic mess, like probably a lot of your listeners work in every single day. And we determined together to break through those barriers and create an innovation juggernaut. And some people say that cultural change takes 5 to 10 years, but if you do it right and you harness the rest of the energy of the team, then you can change culture very quickly. We did, and the book tells about that journey, but it also tells people how they can replicate that journey in their own situations.
Oh yeah, I mean, there was a lot of struggles there in the 412th because being test, a lot of people thought, oh, we do innovation. And I think that was the big kind of discussion point, was a lot of people want to project what they're doing into a new paradigm. And it was kind of breaking down those concepts into where we were going in order to pivot. I don't know what your sessions were on that.
Yeah, no, my thoughts were very similar, that people, I think, assumed that because we had some cutting edge technology out on the ramp that we were naturally innovative. But a bunch of technology doesn't make you innovative. It is the way that people think and the way people talk and the way that they act and the way that they interact and the way they solve problems that makes you innovative or not. And we didn't see that at Edwards, even though we had the fanciest metal out on the ramp. We had a real problem with our processes and our culture, and ultimately we kicked change into afterburner and saw some spectacular results.
Yeah, I mean, what you said there is kind of pivotal, is what do we mean by innovation? Because a lot of people want to revert to the textbook definition that innovation is something new. And that is factually true, but I think when we talk innovation as a trait and a leadership quality to imbue into, we're talking about a mindset and a way you carry yourself.
No, I agree with that. And early on in this journey, my team called the Hustle Squad, which you were a part of, Michael, and we could talk more about that name and their role in a bit. But they asked me that question, what do I mean by innovation? Or what's my definition? And we came up with the idea that innovation was any airman who had an idea was convinced that if they raised their hand, someone was listening, someone would consider it, and someone would act appropriately. You know, I think there's a barrier to entry when you talk about these big changes and consider that innovation and innovation only, because now a bunch of people throw up their hands and say, well, I'm not that smart, and I'm not Elon Musk, or I didn't go to MIT, I can't do innovation. But innovation is fundamentally listening to ideas, considering them and acting upon them, and then unleashing the talent that naturally exists in your organization by convincing everybody that somebody is indeed listening, considering, and acting.
Kind of what you just said, I feel that, because even now as I progressed through my career and adopted a lot of the traits that we had kind of learned, experimented with? Because I would say it wasn't a perfect journey. We had a lot of hard lessons. And what you just said there is kind of the pivotal moment, is understanding and directing. What would you say from a leadership perspective? What is actions or processes that you took to respond to that?
Yeah, it started, I think, Michael, on day one, and you weren't a part of this, but after the change of command and after I went out and I think had lunch with my family, I sat down with all of my subordinate leaders and gave my leadership philosophy. That's something that I always do. But then before I let them leave the room, I handed them a note card. And I said, please write down, whether you put your name or not, I don't care, something that I can do tomorrow to improve the mission or boost quality of life. And we got a slew of those note cards in, and then literally within a week or two, we started getting to yes on the majority of them and then advertising successes. And I think that was the very origin of this listen, consider, act cycle, where people started to believe that I was serious about collaborative leadership, which meant that folks had better ideas than I ever could come up with. They are the experts. They're part of this broader team that was about 11,000 people at the center of the aerospace testing universe. And it started with our core leadership team by asking them to write down their ideas and then getting after it so we could get to yes in as many cases as possible.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally what that sounds to me is just making sure people are heard, which I think that is kind of why a lot of larger systems, they hide behind processes, because that is how they were heard, because they interject into a system and the system gets them what they would need at the end. But I think to spark innovation, you got to do what you just said, and you got to have instant results based upon feedback. And now people can naturally innovate and pivot towards a direction.
I agree with you. I just read a statistic this morning that confirmed something that I already knew. And the statistic was this, that because of employee disengagement, the planet is losing $8.9 trillion of productivity. $8.9 trillion a year of productivity lost because employees are disengaged, which means there's a whole lot of talent out there. There's a whole lot of ideas. And until we as leaders intentionally tap into it, then it's going to go to waste. But if we harness it, then now we can unlock the natural talent that exists in our teams and unleash those teams to do amazing things. And I think we saw a bit of that at Edwards.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen that statistic. That's actually kind of mind-blowing. How much productivity are we losing just because we aren't, utilizing and listening to the people in the organization? And it's like an unfortunate reality to even hear that, because a lot of the industry and even defense now, a lot of our solutions that we are onboarding, capabilities that we're building and integrating into our organizations are to kind of close that causal gap. And it's how much is that attributed to just not being a innovative, inspiring leader? I don't know.
No, I agree with that. And two data points maybe that your listeners might be interested in. And the first one is that as we got this thing going at Edwards, we have data to prove that we had more innovation activity at our one base of 11,000 people than the rest of the United States Air Force combined. And that was based on a metric that the Air Force gave us to use that defined innovation activity. That's proof that if you truly are looking for feedback and ideas from your team, then you'll see this tidal wave of innovation start to take place. And then something we did a little bit later into the process was have a summertime or a summer of waivers. You probably remember that, Michael. And basically the rules were this, that I knew there were a lot of processes that were getting in people's way. And so the summer of waivers was that anyone who had a waiver request could submit it. Nobody between them and me could say no. They could recommend no, but they couldn't say no. And it had to get to me within a week. And we got, in the matter of a very short period of time, over 100 of those waiver requests, which means there were at least 100 things that were clearly getting in people's way, that were in rules, regulations, policies, or procedures. And we did our homework, and pretty quickly got to yes on over 95% of those. Anyone who's out there in the listening audience should know that in your organization, there are rules, regulations, policies, and procedures that are getting in the way of mission accomplishment and quality of life. And if you are intentional about seeking solutions to those, then you're going to be dazzled by the opportunity to break through some of those barriers that are getting in your team's way.
Yeah, no, I fundamentally believe that, kind of unleashing that and then finding what is stopping them. Now, kind of a segue point to get a different perspective. So I feel like once you unleash innovation, now there's a managerial portion to it. Now you have a lot of people innovating, ideating, and recreating. Now I think a lot of people, especially in today's world, is kind of segueing from, okay, now we've fostered a bit of innovation. We have people ideating, executing, delivering ideas. But I think, and this is just a personal feeling, is a lot of organizations and defense agencies are now asking the question, how do we manage this and how do we continue and sustain this? What are some accessions you would have to that?
Yeah, I think the first part of it is that you delegate authority and push resources down to the lowest possible level, so that now you're not trying to centrally manage all of this, but you're giving people the time and the financial resources and the authority to do the things that they're uniquely suited to do as experts in a particular area of the mission. There's a great set of thoughts that came from the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA back during World War II. And in occupied Europe, they created a sabotage field manual so that individuals that were trapped trying to do work or having to do work for the Nazi warfighting machine could subtly sabotage. And there are individual ideas like act stupid or talk a lot. We see a lot of people sabotaging in those ways in our organizations. But then there were process ideas where you would do things to multiply procedures or to require 3 people approve something where 1 would do. That's a specific idea that could allow you to sabotage in an organization. And in our organizations, far too often, we require a whole lot of approvals to get to yes, when if you pushed authority down to the lowest possible level, then now you're streamlining processes, you're demonstrating trust in your people, and you're unlocking that natural talent that could never get unlocked if you're centralizing all the authority and all the control.
Yeah, no. And what's funny is that sabotage manual actually sits on my desk at work. Every day, anytime something happens to those regards, I go to a page in the sabotage manual.
Isn't it as amazing? To me, it's amazing that to some extent our organizations are better at sabotage than at mission accomplishment. And that playbook seems to be the way that our organizations have been created over time. And that playbook is just the opposite of productivity. It hinders productivity and saps quality of life.
Yeah, it's like it's created for good reasons in their mind to vet and analyze and make sure right decisions made. But I think it's because fundamentally, especially with innovation, at times you have to be okay with maybe a 60% solution. And that is kind of where shifting those authorities down is now maybe you're going to make more mistakes, but now you'll have a lot more impact and a lot more learning that's going to happen.
No, I agree with you. And I think that it really comes down to courage of our leadership cadre, where if you push down authority or you waive rules and regulations, then maybe you're going to get bit. And maybe by getting bit, it's going to hurt your career progression. But the reality is that 95+% of the time, by delegating and waiving regulations and rules, if you do it thoughtfully, now you're going to gain capability and gain mission accomplishment and gain the adoration of your workforce instead of finding a pitfall or a trap that could otherwise harm your ability to proceed. A quick story maybe on this one, Michael, that I love to tell. I was our nation's senior defense official to Iraq during COVID and during a very violent time there where I was regularly getting rocketed. And the administration made the decision to evacuate 90% of the embassy, and a few of us stayed with the ambassador, which is where I was stationed. And in order to leave, or more importantly, to bring someone in, you needed to get official approval, not just from the ambassador, but from Maine State Department. They micromanaged the flow of not just the number of people, but the names of the people in and out. So 90% of my team was down in Kuwait, and I went down to visit them because they needed to see me down there, as they were doing a great job separated from where they were supposed to be doing their job in Iraq. And I didn't bring someone up to fill my spot because I wanted the flexibility to come back whenever I needed. And then it was about time for me to come back, and I mentioned it to the ambassador, and he said, well, you just can't come back. You need to get approval from Maine State Department to come back. And I said, no, ambassador, don't worry about it. I didn't fill my spot. I'm just going back to my same spot. And he said, no, you need to get approval. And so it took several days, and I have the piece of paper that required 21 people from 21 different offices at Maine State Department to do a one-for-one swap Teichert for Teichert. That is the type of bureaucracy or sabotage that is sapping the initiative in our organizations. That's why $8.9 trillion of employee disengagement is harming our global economy. We need to get those rules and regulations out of the way in a wise manner and delegate authority down to the lowest possible level and demonstrate trust of our people.
Yeah, I mean, just that bureaucracy bloat alone, I mean, is evidence enough, when you talk about just moving people, but, when you make it even a capability kind of scope, because capability is kind of where any organization is going to ideate around, is what is our weapon, either to ascertain more funds or to, break stuff in this context. That process pipeline is full of bureaucracy, ensuring compliance, ensuring this, and again, it's built with good gracious, but at what point are we creating that kind of hill? So I mean, you're absolutely right. We have to delegate those authorities to the people that are doing the thing, executing the mission, and be ready to fall fast and hard. But I think, again, it's, how now do we convince the middle management and lower it, once we get leadership to understand, hey, how do we push this down? Now, how do we make that middle tier and the lower tier comfortable that they're going to probably make a mistake and to be okay with that?
Yeah, and maybe the first thought is this, that the first time you as a leader snap at somebody for just making a simple, honest mistake or trying and failing, then you cut it off for good. That you eliminate anybody's willingness to take risk and try something new. And so as a leader, you need to be extra sensitive, unless it's a clear violation of an ethical constraint or a law, then you've got to have some level of grace. And the way you demonstrate your acceptance of people trying and failing is far more likely to further a cultural change towards innovation than just how you react when things seem to succeed or go well. And then the other piece of that is that you can't create a culture of innovation from the top down. You can protect it, you can provide resources for it, but ultimately you need to find a way to allow innovation, like we did at Edwards via the Hustle Squad, to bubble up from the bottom. And now those people in the middle that would likely be resistant feel squeezed from the top and squeezed from the bottom, and a leader is aligning incentives and demonstrating the priority via relentless socialization of what we are doing. So now those folks that otherwise would resist realize that it's far easier to go along with the movement than resist the movement, especially when you squeeze from top down and bottom up. And those are some of the strategic elements of getting people comfortable with going along with a movement that allows failure, to some extent celebrates failure, like we did through some awards that we gave out during our journey, while at the same time promoting people to take chances and to see what good can come from it in a deliberate, acceptable way.
Yeah, I mean, that sandwich method is something I've taken with me my whole career. As you mentioned, when we were at Edwards, what we were doing with the innovation team is I still call it to this day, like creating disciples, right? You're creating additional believers of this process, of this idea and concept, and they're spreading that infectious kind of energy towards it. And when you incentivize it, then you get people more excited. You just have to place it holistically and meaningfully, and something that values to them. I remember one day in my career, and this like always encouraged me all the time, was when I was at Edwards and I got a random achievement medal in my records that wasn't awarded to me, but that's fine, or anything. I just noticed it, and it was signed by the wing commander and everything, and it was silent recognition for everything I'd done, and that's all I needed. It was just something that motivated myself to keep going. And I think that's where it becomes hard. Is for me, that was extremely rewarding. It was silent recognition, showed up my records. It was another point for me, but to other people, perhaps that's not enough. So it's not only is it creating that award structure, but it's getting inside the people that are leading those people to see what they value and maybe tailoring to them. I don't know what you would have to say about that.
I do think there's a truth to that. And I used a phrase earlier, relentless socialization. And what I meant by that is that this is becoming the thing that our organization is about. And everywhere someone turns, all of a sudden they're seeing a reinforcement that is proving the credibility and the truth of what we are trying to accomplish. Because there's a lot of people that talk about innovation and it's a flash in the pan, or it's a sign up on the wall, or it's a one and done type of thing. But when you are trying to reach people in a variety of ways to see what sticks, then now you are multiplying the chance that they're going to go along with you. And in our case, you would show up in the parking lot and walk into the building and you'd see chalk art about it on the sidewalk. And you'd walk into a building and you'd see a culture wall of provocative statements and non-traditional images. You would walk down the hall and you'd see posters. You'd get to your desk and there'd be a booklet or a pamphlet or a pin or a t-shirt. You'd turn on your computer and now there's a video from the wing commander or from the hustle squad. Your spouses were a part of a spouse innovation movement or showcase. Kids on base were doing the same thing. And now you're reinforcing by awards and by chances to go on educational trips and training opportunities and a variety of other things, that this isn't just a flash in the pan or a slogan. This is serious, and it's becoming who we are at our core. And when you do that, then now people naturally get swept up in the buzz that comes with that relentless socialization.
Yeah, it's almost like an IO campaign where you're trying to override their synapse completely to kind of buy into that. And again, I think those principles is readily apparent in almost everything we do. And again, you also have to be careful with it a little bit, because what I've seen too is you got to be purposeful and constantly changing that advertising, because if you advertise one cataclysm, one kind of like chamber, if you will, at a time, it almost becomes a soundbite, and then sound bites become irrelevant at some point.
They can. I think if you bombard people in different ways, and especially when you get the cool kids from the hustle squad that are doing things at the lower level that everyone wants to be like them. You have a wing commander that's fully on board and is wearing a judge's wig one day, or is in a floaty raft in the base pool on another day, or is doing a manifesto video another day, that all of a sudden you're seeing these things that are non-traditional, that are breaking through the standard noise, and it's easy to get caught up in a positive way with that type of movement, because it is improving the mission and it is improving quality of life, and it's also pretty catchy as well.
Yeah. So, we talked about a variety of topics, and a lot of this has been surrounded around organizational and tactical kind of guys, and some strategic. So innovation is obviously a lot larger in a lot of concepts. So what kind of sessions would you have to say fostering innovation at a large scale, like the Hill or government wide? What would be some sessions there?
No, so I appreciate that. And frankly, what we did at Edwards was proof of concept of that level of scale. That I know AFWorks and others were looking for a base in the start of this movement, starting in around 2018, to prove that you could do these types of concepts and apply them at the scale of an Air Force base and 11,000 people in the varied mission of a place like Edwards Air Force Base, the center of the aerospace testing universe. And I fundamentally believe that those same concepts that we've talked about for the last 30 minutes, Michael, can scale up in a variety of ways. Now, it's always tough when you've got more people in the middle to try to break through, but the higher you go up the chain, the more opportunity you have to push and delegate authority and resources down to the place where they belong, so that then you don't have this belief that you've got to centralize innovation at the top, but you fundamentally democratize it down to the lowest possible level. And when you do that, actually, I think it's interesting because you mentioned the Hill. I think that's commensurate with the way our nation was designed. Not to get political here, but you read through the Constitution and you realize that there's the structure of how our government is to run. And then there's the Bill of Rights. And at the end, the Bill of Rights, the 10th Amendment, says that anything that's essentially not in that document is delegated down to the states or to the people. It's so interesting that these leadership concepts and innovation concepts that we just talked about are fundamentally American. They're not uniquely American, but they're designed into the structure of our country. If we followed it better, then we would solve a lot of the problems that exist out there. But unfortunately, we've lost sight of things, and folks have centralized control far more than our founders had intended.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and it kind of clicked in my head. When you really look at some history and then you compare it to the current paradigms, you see in the news a lot recently is EU's very heavy regulation has kind of stifled their progression. And we're the front runners because we kind of stepped away from that. So I think it's interesting that you point that out at this time, especially with everything going on in the news today, as they talk about how do we, overcome this and pivot this, because a lot of the decisions they have made recently has made some changes, and they've also kind of neutered a lot of capability out of AI, kind of lost a lot of companies' interest because of this overregulation. So I think it's kind of interesting you'd mention that.
No, they get in their own way, and it runs counter or perpendicular to the way that our country was designed. And frankly, the way that we have thrived over the course of history has not been because of centralization, but just the opposite. It's been through this democratization of pushing authority and resources and ideas and decision-making down to the lowest possible level. It probably won't come as a surprise to your listeners that the Air Force has a regulation on regulations that's about 200 pages long. And just that is a way to describe or define the handcuffs and the shackles that we've put ourselves in. But something I realized during this journey is that actually, at least at the wing commander level, there's a lot of authority to delegate authority and to waive regulations and rules. And it just takes leaders that have the courage to take a step out and try something at their own personal career progression risk to see how it works and to trust their people. And I think the more and more leaders that become willing to take that level of risk, the more likely it is that we can get back to some of those foundational principles, which is pushing authority and resources down to the lowest possible level.
No, that's great. And so as we were kind of talking about the more legal and historic matters, you mentioned at the beginning, you were running in the state of Maryland. If you were to have made it in, what are some key change areas you would have made to further that journey?
Yeah, and the first one is, and by the way, the journey itself as a candidate was wonderful. Things were going great. It happened to be the case that a very popular former governor jumped into the race on the filing deadline, and I made the decision to jump out to support him. But the things that I was planning to do were part of the way that I managed the campaign to begin with, which is people are thirsting, number one, for the type of leaders that inspire and encourage and that they can trust and that trust them. And my intent was to snap us back to not politics and politicians, which got us into the mess that we find ourselves in today, but use the tools of leadership that is fundamentally different than politics to find a way to wrestle our nation back to where it belongs. And then one of the first things that I planned to do was to open up the Constitution, and every time a bill came through the Senate, look to see if it was a federal responsibility, and if not, close the book and say, sorry, while this may be a good idea, it's left to the states and to the people. And I think even leaders of teams or flights or squadrons or organizations have this tendency to believe that because a good idea is out there, that they should do it. Instead of that good idea, if it's good, is better applied by executing it from the lowest possible level instead of just deciding that good ideas always come to the top. Good ideas are good ideas, and they're going to succeed down the chain like they would up the chain, and they're better applied when they're pushed down.
No, that is the key nugget here, right? Because we live in a paradigm where a lot of the time a good idea will get shotgunned all the way up, and maybe, as you mentioned, it was good to be executed at that level, but now that it's moved up, maybe it's lost original intent, or maybe if we're talking capabilities, now it's had scope creep. And I think we see that the most inside large organizations in the government is they're bought into that good idea, but now it's like, that's great, let's get it into this higher authority or this higher headquarters, and now we're going to groom it and grow it for you. But now things get slapped on, and now it's not as fast, lean, and mean as it was at the appropriate level.
You're spot on. And I talked about that note card idea on day one of taking command, where people wrote down what are the low-hanging fruit things that I can do. And most of those were delegate authority. They were saying, hey, boss, the previous commander held this authority at his level. Can you push it down to ours? And we'll push it down even lower. And all of those types of things that are innovations of their own right are infinite return on investment, because you get improved effectiveness divided by zero cost, which is an infinite number. And waivers are infinite returns of investment. And those delegations of authority are infinite returns on investment. And the more we are prone to see an idea and say, that may make sense, let me give resource, let me give top cover, let me give time so that you can implement it at your lower level, then the more likely it is that that idea will be better applied to the situation at hand, and that it will continue on because it doesn't create this requirement creep that eats away all of the elements of goodness in that good idea.
Yeah, that scope creep is, man, I feel that in my bones just thinking about it, because once you get that buy-in, you get that idea throttled up, it's amazing how fast it could be ruined by that. So one of the key things for me that I kind of share to people is not everything needs scaled, and not every innovation needs to go up, because maybe someone made a tool in this organization that worked, and now everybody's like, oh, let's take it and we can use it other here. And it's like you try to grow this idea into something it's not and use it in places it wasn't meant for. Or maybe, they removed a waiver here, but it doesn't make sense to remove it here because of that mission set or that organization. So that's where those decisions do have to be made appropriately, because then you can have the most impact, the most, as you mentioned, ROI.
Yeah, and some of the things that the higher level can do is provide conduits of communication. so that other organizations know that this lower organization decided to do this thing differently. If they're interested in doing something similar, then reach out and ask directly and use the central organization as the repository or the connecting function between the lower organizations, so that everybody has the library of good ideas, so that then they can do their own research and see if that good idea applies to them.
Yeah, yeah, having that repo where they can take it out, and again, a lot of organizations have made those accessions now, but I think there is a little bit of a devil in the details with that, which is semi-unfortunate. Is when an idea owner kind of posts an idea, a lot of people find it, take it, and they almost want the idea holder to grow it. But that's a whole systemic issue. It's like, okay, now do this for me. But the reality is so that you can replicate it in your organization.
Yeah, and if there is something that truly has universal applicability, then there's no problem in implementing it, but make sure that you put the right constraints on yourself at the higher echelon, so that you don't just take away all of the vitality and flexibility that came with that idea when it was applied at the lower level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think in the 35 minutes or so, we've really kind of cataloged everything, do your IO campaign, advertise, change it, and don't give up. Create your disciples, create followers, create people that are going to spread the good news, and then give those people top cover and push down authorities, I think, are our main tenets here. And then find a way to catalog and share that to the world so someone else can take it. And I've been happy to have been a part of that and continue it throughout my career. So I appreciate that. And
well, Michael, I'm going to jump in and say some things, because I know you would never say them about yourself. But a big part of the blessings that I've seen as a part of this journey was to watch you and others like you, Michael. I know I talk about in my book in the beginning about VR, AR, and XR in a hypothetical way in agile combat employment, and some of the innovations that you and Jeremy Nielsen and others were doing at Edwards. But then I talk about you as Staff Sergeant Meyer having the courage to raise your hand and suggest that we launch a TEDx event at Edwards, and then execute on that event, making it a vital part of this incredible journey that we were a part of at Edwards, as proof positive that when you truly do see someone with an idea and you listen, consider, and act, then the results can be magnificent. And then, not to put words in your mouth, but there are 3 benefits that I see to doing what I've described over the course of these 35 or 40 minutes. The number one is improved mission accomplishment. I think we've talked about that a lot. But then the next 2 are just as important. And one of them is quality of life. And one of them is an alumni network spread around the globe that has seen goodness in action and then can try to replicate those types of cultural change elements in their own world. And from a quality of life perspective, going back to $8.9 trillion of lost productivity based on a disengaged workforce. When you and I talked, Michael, as I was putting together a book, you described how you were on the verge of quitting the military before you had the chance to be a part of an engaged workforce. You talked about how that journey gave you the tools to chase the future, and it gave you a higher purpose. And that is so core and fundamental to an example of what it means to improve quality of life. The way we could define that, Chief Eischen would verify this, that we did this quality of life survey, a DEOX for those that are in the military, right at the end of our time. And Chief Eischen read through it, and he read the results, and he read all the comments, and his thought was, I've never seen something this good. And it wasn't because of me, and it wasn't because of the command team, though we were a part of it, but it is because our organization fundamentally felt engaged, and that opened up their positive quality of life in a way that it never could. And then now we've got this alumni network that's spread around the world. And Michael, you're killing it, and I'm on your podcast. And next week, I'm having lunch with another member of that team that's here in the DC area doing great things. I'm on a venture capital firm as a consultant with another member of the team. I'm speaking for another member of the team down at Eglin Air Force Base that's moved there since we had our journey together. And so if you think about the benefits of doing these things, it is mission accomplishment, it is quality of life, and it is an alumni network that can impact our country and the world because they have seen it done right in the context in which we did it back there at the center of the aerospace testing universe.
Oh, that's an excellent roll up. I think we'll actually leave it on that note before I spoil that. That was great, so I appreciate your time. And as you mentioned, networking is the key to a lot of the success through that network. So thank you.
Michael, you have been
Absolutely.
awesome. I enjoyed this. People, check out my book. Go to johnteichert.com. If I can do anything for your listeners, reach out via those mechanisms or on LinkedIn. And I love helping to unlock talent and unleash teams. And if there's something I can do for Michael, of course you, but anyone who's listening, please reach out and let me know.